Thank you.
Baruch Hashem, we are up to chapter 15. Kings 1, chapter 15, I think. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Where's Banish?
And he's got surgery at the hand.
Oh,
Nothing serious, but...
should have a refuah shalema. We'll learn today will be so that Banish has a complete recovery, Metz Hashem. Which brings us to an interesting point. Do you have to know the name of the person when you make when you bless him to have a refuah shalema or not?
It's better, yes, but...
Do you have to, or don't you have to? The answer is what you said. It's better, yes, but it's not necessary. How do you know it's not necessary? A couple of ways. Number one, the prayer in the davening. Rafa'inu Hashem b'nei Rafei, Hosheinu b'nei Boshea. We pray for refuah shalema v'cholei amacha Yisrael. We don't mention anybody's name. So you can have in mind who you want. That's number one. Number two, the Gemara says that Bilam, Bilam, Yodea l'chavin es hashah. He knew how to find the moment that HaKadosh Baruch Hu was in anger, whatever that exactly means. And the Gemara says, how much or how long is that moment of anger? He would concentrate on that moment of anger to heap his curses. So the Gemara says, Kamahu shasa ketzev. How long is the moment of anger by HaKadosh Baruch Hu? Says the Gemara, keherafayim, like the blink of an eye. Says the Gemara, how could he then curse anybody in the blink of an eye? So the Gemara says he would just say, Kla'im, destroy them. But he didn't mention a name. He didn't say who to destroy. Elamai, what that means, therefore we must say that when he says Kla'im, when he says destroy them, and he has in mind who he means, it works. So, Madach, Lamida Ra'ah, if for a bad thing, you don't have to say the name, all is enough for your intention. Alachas kama v'kama, for certain, for a good thing. For a good thing, you don't have to know the name. You can just say, refuah shalema to Mr. Smith, or Mr. Jones, or whatever it is, Mr. Friedman, Mr. Goldberg. So we all say refuah shalema to Beirish, our chaver. He should have a full recovery. Okay, chapter 15. Ubishna shmona esrei lemelach Yehuda ben Avot Melach Aviyam al Yehuda. In the 18th year, it's really the 17th year, but going into the 18th year of Yehuda ben Avot, the first king of Israel, Melach Aviyam al Yehuda, Aviyam the son of Rechavim, ruled over Yehuda. So now we have David, Shlomo, Rechavam, Aviyam. He's the fourth in line of the kings of Yehuda. Shalosh shanim malach b'Yerushalayim. He rules for 3 years. B'shem imo Ma'acho bas Avishalom, and his name of his mother is Macha bas Avshalom, the son of David. Many say he married a cousin. Vayelech v'chol chatas aviv asher osa lefanav, and he went in the sins of his fathers that was already done. What does this mean? It means that he did not add anything corrupt or improper, but he maintained that which his father started, allowing private altars, allowing certain things that his father Rechavam copied from Yehuda ben Avot. Anyway, below his heart was not complete with God, kilvad David aviv, like the heart of his father David. This sentence needs a lot of explanation, and we will see a little bit about it when we read from the alternative source of Chronicles, which has supplemental information about Aviyam, which will help us understand this sentence. What's problematic about this sentence? When you want to cite somebody as being wicked, do you say, his heart was not as good as Chveis Rabbi Yoshev. His heart was not as good as Rabbi Shach. Or his heart was not as good as the Chafetz Chaim. Oh, his heart was not as good as some other tzaddik. You don't say that. You say the guy had a corrupted heart. What are you comparing his heart to the heart of his father David? You're comparing his heart to the heart of his father David, which seems to indicate he didn't measure up to the high standard perhaps of David. But, he was, a fine Jew, but not a big tzaddik. So if you want to tell me that he did evil in the eyes of God, and he went in the ways of the sins of his father, why do you then end off this sentence that his heart was not complete, it was not sincere with Hashem like the heart of his father David, his ancestor, 3 generations up. Ki leman David nasan Hashem lakavlo near Yerushalayim. And really, Hashem, so to speak here, tolerates this Aviyam because of his great-grandfather David. And God gave a promise to David that there would always be a semblance of his monarchy ruling over Israel. And here he is ruling in Jerusalem. Lahakim espino akrav. This was a promise that Hashem made to David to maintain his son, meaning his progeny after him. Ulahamid es Yerushalayim, and to continue Yerushalayim Ira Kodesh. Asher also David es Hayashar be'enei Hashem. And here again, we're contrasting this Aviyam to David, who walked straight, sincerely, diligently with his heart. Lo sar mikol asher tzivahu kol yimei chayav. He did not deviate from what Hashem told him or commanded all the days of his life, rak bidvar Uriah HaChiti, except in the matter of Uriah, or Uriah the Hittite. We discussed this, I think, already. This is a citation of the real failure, you might say moral failure of David, when he had Uriah HaChiti basically killed in order to be able to claim his wife. And this is another strange sentence. There was a war between Rechavam, who's dead already, and Aviyam, his son, is the king. For some reason it harkens back to Rechavam, Ubein Yeravam, who's still alive, all the days of his life, all the days of Aviyam's life, maybe. And there was a war. So the Mefarshim explained that this means that the war, remember there was these skirmishes and little conflicts here and there, no all-out war, but there was war between Rechavam and Yeravam, and Aviyam continued that. He continued to wage war against Yeravam, and we will read from Divrei Hayamim where Aviyam went into full-fledged war with Yeravam ben Avat. V'yeser divrei Aviyam, and the rest of the matters of Aviyam, b'chol asher asa, and all that he accomplished, Elohim ksuvim al sefer divrei hayom l'malchi Yehuda, they are recorded in the chronicles of the kings of Yehuda. U'milchama ha'isa ben Aviyam u'ben Yeravam, and there was this war between Aviyam and Yeravam, which will end up being the distinguishing factor in Aviyam's life, because we will read from Chronicles. Vayishkav Aviyam im avosav, and Aviyam was laid to rest with his fathers. Vayikru also be'ir David, he was buried in the city of David. Vayimloch Asa beno tachtav, and Asa, his son, ruled in his place.
So, the civil war.
Excuse me? Yes, a civil war. So let's read about this civil war, and then let's raise the very remarkable question of why what I'm about to read to you is not recorded in the Book of Kings. All right, so we're going to take a look now in Chronicles 2, Divrei Hayamim Beis, Perek Yud Gimel, and I'm going to I'll read it quickly, hopefully, and translate it. Again, in the 18th year of Yeravam, Yehuda, and Abiyah rules over Yehuda. And the Mefarshim point out that his real name was Aviyah. And why was he called in Sefer Melachim Aviyam? Because Yeravam ben Avad had a son named Aviyam, and so as not to confuse the two, in Chronicles they just dropped the mem and put a hey at the end of his name. He rules for 3 years, and the name of his mother is mentioned. Umilchama Isa ben Aviyah ben Yeravam. There's this war between Aviyah and Yeravam. Vayesar Aviyah es hamilchama b'chayil giboro milchama arba miyos elef ish. And Aviyam raises 400,000 men and under arms, Judeans from Yehuda, and he had some from Binyamin, etc. But anyway, he raises 400,000 men in his army. And Yeravam raises 800,000 men. And Aviyam gets up and he declares this very famous speech, and he says as follows: Shima'uni Yeravam v'chal Yisrael. Listen to me, Yeravam and all of Israel. So obviously he's broadcasting this in some fashion to the army of Yeravam ben Nevat. Halo lachem lo das. You should all know. Ki Hashem Elokei Yisrael nosam mamlacha leDavid al Yisrael olam. God gave the rule of kingship to David, my ancestor, to rule over Israel forever. Lo, to him, ulubanav, and to his children, Baris Melach, a covenant of salt. Salt, just like salt is in the earth. It's like the, what do they call it? The salt of the earth. Vayokam Yeravam ben Nevat, and Yeravam ben Nevat arose, the servant of Shlomo, the son of David, and he rebelled against his master. And he gathered about him Anoshim Rekim, idle people, B'nai Belial, men of no faith, Vayisamtzu al Rechavim, and they forced themselves over Rechavim and Shlomo. And Rechavim was a young man, Nar Barach Levav, and soft-hearted. Below his chazek lifneim, he didn't stand up to them. V'ato atem omrim lehis chazek lifneim mamlachas Hashem b'yad b'nei David. And you have the temerity to raise yourselves against the rule of the house of the king of David. V'atem hamon rav, you have a lot of men, 800,000. V'mochem eglei zav, you have these idols, the icons of the golden calves. Asher also lachem Yeravam, which Yeravam made for you, le'elohim, for a god. Halo hidachtem es kohanei Hashem, you pushed away the kohanim of Hashem, b'nei Aaron, v'halaviyim, and you made priests from all the length and breadth of the land. Whoever wanted to can come forward and become a priest. Amei haaretz, kol habo l'malei yodo. Whoever wants to take the job takes it, and he can bring korbanos and all this and that. Okay, and these priests that you have appointed are not by the will of God. V'anachnu, and we, the Judeans, Hashem Elokeinu v'lo azavonu. We serve God and we have not abandoned Him. We have true priests who serve God, the children of Aaron, and they offer sacrifices to God, etc. And day, night, and they put the lechem upon him here. We have the holy menorah, the pure menorah, and we have its its lights, the voyer, to light us up at night during the day. And we are maintaining the safeguarding the memory of Hashem, and you have abandoned them. This is his speech that he makes to the army of Israel that's arrayed against him. We have as our head, as our commander-in-chief, so to speak, is God himself, and his priests, and the trumpets, that they are going to blast. You know, in the Torah it says, whenever there's a war, you blast with the chatzotzeros, and we're going to blast them. B'nai Yisrael, al tilachem, do not fight with God. Elokei avosechem, ki lo tatzlichu, you will not be successful. Yeravam heiseves hamara levo me'achareim, and Yeravam decides to outflank them, and sends he has 800,000 men, he sends a whole division of his army to go behind the army of the king of Yehuda. Vayu lefnei Yehuda v'hamarav me'achareim. The king of Yehuda was facing the enemies before him, and the ambush, or those who were coming from behind him. Vayifnu Yehuda, and the army of Yehuda turns, the soldiers turn, and oh boy, they have a two-front war, there's a two-pronged attack against them. Vayitzaku Hashem, and they cry out to God. V'kohanim mechatzotrim b'chatzotzros, and the kohanim are sounding the chatzotzros. Vayoriu ish Yehuda, and the people and the men of Yehuda cry out. Vahi b'horiya ish Yehuda, when they cry out, the Elokim nogaf es Yeravam b'chol Yisrael l'fnei aviyah b'Yehuda, and God smites the army of Israel before the smaller army of Yehuda. Vayanusu b'nei Yisrael v'bnei Yehuda, and they run away, they flee the battlefield. Vayitnei Melachim b'yadam, and God gives the Judeans victory and delivers the enemy Israel into their hands. Vayaku b'hem aviyah v'amo makor rabah, and they strike a great blow. And listen to this: Vayiflu chalolim miYisrael chamesh mil salafish, and they lost 500,000 men, wounded and killed. Vayikanu b'nei Yisrael v'esahi, and they submit at that time before the king of Yehuda. Vayiyamtzu b'nei Yehuda ki nishanu al Hashem lokei l'seim, and they win the war because they relied on Hashem, the God of their ancestors. Vayirdof avi achrei Yerovam, vayilkod mimenu arim espeisel v'espenosel v'yeshona v'espenosel v'yeshona.
500,000 men passed away.
Died or were wounded or were captured or ran
or
away
together.
or disappeared.
Altogether.
Yet, no, only from the army of Israel. Which is a very interesting point, which you made. I was going to make it, but you made it first, so you get the credit. It seems like a one-sided report. There's no mention of the casualties from the army of Yehuda. Why is there no mention? It's impossible to conceive is that they didn't lose men. The answer is this was taken from, where did Ezra get this information from? The Chronicles of the Kings of Yehuda. The Kings of Yehuda didn't list their casualties. They listed their enemies' casualties. They listed the vanquished casualties. Their own casualties they buried in history, so it is not revealed. So therefore Ezra could not write how much they lost. And that's just an indication of where is the source. Well, history is written by the victors, but that's beside the point. History here is all drawn from the Chronicles of the Kings of Yehuda, because once again, Ezra did not have prophecy. He relied on sources that he had available to him, and the sources that he had available to him buried. The sources that he buried the number of casualties from the army of Yehuda. Here's another very interesting passage. And Yerovam could not muster any more force any longer in the days of Avia. This is this 3-year period. He was just, you would say, deflated, and no way could he raise an army, or he had no more macho left, no more bravado. Bimei Avia, vayifgehu Hashem vayomas, and God struck him and he died. Who does it sound like God struck here? Who is the he in this sentence? V'le'otzar koach Yerovam, and the power of Yerovam could not be harnessed any longer. Bimei Avia, vayifgehu Hashem, and God struck him and he died. Look, you would think that the pronoun here, where it doesn't mention the name of who got struck, reflects back on Yerovam, who is the subject of the sentence. But the rabbis view it differently. The Pashut Pshat, meaning the simple meaning is Yerovam was struck. He died. Which would help us understand the question I think you raised. Whatever happens to Yerovam, why doesn't he get punished? The answer is he was punished. But God withheld his punishment until he humiliated him completely by having him defeated by this minority, 1 against 2, and they yet won. This was his recompense. This was his payment for his deviant behavior. God, struck his army and defeated them with a massive blow of approximately 500,000 men. So that is the punishment to Yerovam. However, the Chazal say that it refers to Avia. After this unbelievable victory, God struck Avia. Okay.
Why did they say that?
Why did they say that? They say that because Yerovam does not die before Avia. Avia dies first. And then the next pasuk says, Vayischazek Avia, and Avia strengthened himself. Vayisolo Noshim Arba Asrei, he married 14 wives. And he gave birth to 22 sons and 16 daughters. And then it says, the rest of the matters of Avia, his ways and his words, they are written in the Chronicles. and he was laid to rest with his ancestors, and he was buried. So what does he mean, Vayifkeu Hashem Bayomos? And here it tells you Bayomos a second time. So he didn't die twice. Why they say the first one is that Yerovam, that didn't die then, because it said right after that Aviyah died. It's really referring to the same death. It's referring to Aviyah's death. That's a mistake.
Why to write like this?
What?
Why to write like this?
Why to write like this? So the Gemara has a three-way understanding of why did Aviyah die. He only rules for 3 years, and there's a three-way disagreement. One is that he ridiculed Achia Hashiloni when he said at the beginning, "You usurp," meaning he was speaking to the army, he was speaking to the kingdom of Israel, and he said to them, "You usurp the Malchus from my ancestor David, where Hashem promised it to him." And it sounded as if what the children of Israel did by electing or appointing Yerovam ben Nevat to be their king was a travesty against God, but it wasn't. Because Achia Hashiloni, the prophet of Hashem, came and wrenched the Malchus away from the son of Shlomo because of what Shlomo did that was wrong in the eyes of Hashem. So he had no right, says Rabbi Yochanan in the Gemara, to accuse the children of Israel, the kingdom of Israel, as having condoned or actually adopted a travesty to seize the Malchus. That's one pshat. And that's why God struck him and he died early, after 3 years only. Another pshat is that they say that he actually killed Achia Hashiloni. He killed the prophet Aviyah. So therefore, he died. God struck him. Okay, but anyway, what's more interesting at this point is, why is all this missing from the book of Melachim? And even more problematic, perhaps, is in the book of Melachim, we said he did evil in the eyes of God, or he didn't follow so wholeheartedly as David HaMelech. And yet here he makes this speech. We, the kingdom of Judea, we embrace God. We have Kohanim. We have sacrifices. We are true followers of Hashem. We haven't deviated like Yerovam ben Nevat. We don't have golden icons. We didn't make private altars all over the place. We didn't drive the Kohanim and the Levium out of our country. And here in Melachim, it says his heart was no good. It wasn't good like his heart was David. So we asked, again, why did if the Navi wants to say that he was a corrupted person, either morally or spiritually or whatever, why does it compare him to David? The answer is because he had a religious persona, a public persona. He got up and spouted. He was like, I don't want to say this, exactly, but he was basically like these evangelicals who preach and pound the podium and make all these great speeches about how they trust in Hashem, and then we find out their personal behavior is corrupt, and they are devoid of ethics and morals, and they not only do they embezzle the monies and enrich themselves, but they pander around with women, etc. So what the Chumash, what the Navi is telling us here is publicly he wore a shtreimel. Publicly he wore a gartel. Publicly he wore a long chalat. And he demonstrated and ranted about how he, the king of Yehuda, and his people are so religiously motivated and so spiritual, when behind in his heart he was anything but. And that's why...
How do we know?
That's what the Gemara, I'm telling you, that's what the Mefarshim want to say. I think that's a very true thing, because we got a problem here. In one place it's critical of him, and here in Divrei Hayomim, he sounds like, a holy roller. So how do you reconcile these two things? The answer is he was a holy roller in his public persona. In his private life, he was corrupted. He didn't really believe in what he was saying.
Why do we then accept the Book of Chronicles in our
Also, so why do we say? Why would Ezra want to put this out? If this is true that this speech is devoid of sincere intent and sincere belief, why would Ezra put it out? So the answer to that question is, why did he win the war? Because the people who heard him, his followers, meaning the citizens of the kingdom of Yehuda, they believed it. They believed they were fighting the war of God. They did go into battle with true kavanah. Of course, why? Their lives are on the line. There's no atheist in a foxhole. When you go into battle, you stop, you drop all of this pretense of I don't believe in God, I don't know, who knows, whatever. You say, listen here, Hashem, please help me. My life's on the line. I'm facing an enemy. I could die. I could get wounded. I could get captured. I could get lost on the battlefield. I can have all kinds of tragedies befall me. I'm praying to Hashem. So when he's made this speech in front of the armies that are arrayed about to go into battle, the people, his people, believed him. And therefore, they didn't probe their king. They didn't know what he was doing, in his heart or even in his private life so much. They lived in Haifa, they lived in Rehovot, they lived all scattered around. They didn't all know what was going on in his palace in Jerusalem. They just knew that he had this persona of being a religious, spiritual person. They believed what he preached, and they went to battle with that belief, and therefore they won. So therefore it's a complex matter. As all ethical, moral issues turn out to have two sides many times, not always, but many times, and there are always complex issues involved. You take, I don't like to speak about this guy Walter, but you take Walter, his public persona was, he was counseling and he wrote many books. In fact, as my grandchildren read his books, and of all the books that they read, and I was always trying to, shtup them with books. You know what shtup them with books means? Push books into them. Read. Stop with this, internet crap. Excuse me. Stop with this internet. Get into reading. And I would give them, I bought Walter's books when, this goes back 15 years ago, maybe more than 15 years ago. And when he first started writing his books, they were very popular. And he had a public persona of being a very, correct and spiritual person. And behind the scenes, look what evil lurks in the hearts of man. And that's exactly what we're talking about here. That's the lesson that we should learn from this. People profess, pontificate, posture, and yet they don't really have spiritual value. And that, unfortunately, afflicts us from generation to generation to our generation, and who knows if it will end with us. We don't know what the future holds, but if, ein chadash tachas hashemesh, there's nothing new under the sun. It's a revolving circle. It keeps reoccurring. And that, I think, is the lesson for us between what was written in Sefer Melachim and what's recorded in Divrei Hayomim. Okay. And now we will begin to learn about Asa, the next king of Yehuda. Asa, the king of Yehuda, will rule for 41 years.
Aleph Samach Aleph.
Excuse me, Aleph Samach Aleph. Aleph Samach Aleph. Okay, so Vayishkav Aviyam Imavosav. They bury him in the city of David. Vayimloch Asa beno tachtav. And his son Asa rises to the throne and rules after him. Okay, Uvishnas Esrim liYerovam Melech Yisrael. Now, this is his father Aviyam only ruled for 3 years. So Yerovam ben Avad is ruled for 21 years. He's still king of Israel. Okay, Vishnas Esrim liYerovam Melech Yisrael.
So he didn't die in the war.
Excuse me?
He didn't die.
He did not die in the war. He died afterwards. B'shnas Esrim liYerovam Melech Yisrael, Molach Asa Melech Yehuda, Asa became the king. Bar boim b'achas shana Molach b'Yerushalayim, and he rules for 41 years in Jerusalem. V'shem imo, in the name of his mother, is Machal bas Avshalom. That's the same woman that's mentioned as being the wife of Rechavim. So it's his grandmother. Okay, so that's how Mefarshim learned. She was a very powerful woman. His grandmother, the wife of Rechavim, who bore Aviyam, and Aviyam dies when he's after king for 3 years. So she's, what would they call that? The Queen Mother or something? Vayas also hayosher be'enei Hashem ki David Aviv. Now, finally, we have a tzaddik for a king. Asa does what's straightforward in the eyes of God, just like his father David. He is honest, diligent, straightforward. Vayaver hakedeshim in haaretz, and he rids the land of harlotry, harlots. Vayoser kol hagilulim asher asu avosav, and he removes all of the abominations that his father Avram, who did not do what was right in the eyes of God, tolerated in the land. V'gam es macha imo, and even his grandmother Macha, vayisireha migvira, he removed her from her high horse, from her prominent position. Asher also some mifletzes la'ashera, she made this big, what we call it, andarto, some kind of a monument to Asherah. By the way, you know there's a thing in Israel, in Yerushalayim, called the mifletzet, the monster. You know about that? There's this big, I guess you would call it, thing. It looks like something out of Star Wars, you know, like one of these faces of a monster, and there's all kinds of slides that come out of its nose and its mouth and its ears, and kids go climbing up to the top and slide down. It's called the mifletzet. Why is it called the mifletzet, the monster? In other words, we, after this event, in the Hebrew language, Lashon HaKodesh even, we adopted that what this woman did, this big monument to Asherah, we call it the monster. We call it the monster. If you look up the word mifletzet in a Hebrew-English dictionary, it will tell you mifletzet is a monster. So she made this great monument, or whatever exactly it was, I don't know, but it was called the mifletzet to Asherah. Where is it? Yeah, Asherah also saw mifletzet. Lo Asher, Vayichros osas mitzlafta, and Achaz destroyed this big monument. Vayifsrov, and he burnt it benachal kidron. He treated it like an idol, which it was. It was actually an andarta, was a monument to idolatry, but he treated it like an actual icon of idolatry. He burnt it, and he distributed the ashes in Nachal Kidron, just like what Moshe Rabbeinu did to the Egel Hazav. He pounded it, then he beat it into dust, and then he sprinkled the dust over the waters, which the Jewish people drank from. V'habomos lo soru, notwithstanding Asa's great effort, he could not rid the bomos. Rak levad Asa ha'yosholim im Hashem kol yimo, but the heart of Asa was straight and complete, and with Hashem all of his days. In other words, he fought valiantly to rid the country of the bomos, but he couldn't. Now, you can easily, not easily, but you could rid the country of harlots, you know, prostitutes. But to rid the country of bomos is extremely difficult. Why? I can go build one any day of the week. I can go into my backyard, gather a bunch of stones, put together a little altar, have a little service to God, make a sacrifice, dismantle it, and go buy Charlie. So it's very hard. In other words, you can't just take action to rid the country of bomos. You have to rid the concept from the hearts of the people. You can't, legislate morality, as they say. Well, you can round up all of the women of ill repute and rid them, or drive them out of the country, incarcerate them, or do something, but you can't rid the country of the bomos, because it's too easy to build, dismantle. And what was it? It wasn't prompted so much by an evil thought, it was prompted by a misdirected thought. Meaning what? A bama was a sacrifice that a person made. Again, we've explained this I think before, but let's just say it's worth repeating. A bama is a private altar that a Jew would erect in order to make a korban to Hashem. Because if you recall, we talked about how hard it was to travel, close up shop, travel to Jerusalem, purify yourselves, get online in the Beis HaMikdash, go back home. It took a month. So, I'm spiritually motivated. I am passionately enraptured, and I want to thank Hashem for saving me from that terrible automobile accident or whatever it was. And I want to make a private bummer. I can't take a month off now and schlep to Jerusalem. So I'm going to make my bummer in my backyard, and I'm going to purify myself by going to a mikveh, and I'm going to put on my shtreimel and my gartel, and I'm going to make a sacrifice. I'm doing this because I'm spiritually motivated. That also could not rid from the hearts of the people, the hearts, the minds of the people.
Can I say something very dangerous?
Uh-oh. Should I duck? No, okay, go ahead.
Lehavdil, what is the difference of this Bama and a Bet HaKnesset?
Oh, okay. The Beit HaKnesset is after the destruction of the temple. What is a Beit HaKnesset? A Beit HaKnesset is that we thought, many people thought, that the covenant was broken when the temple was destroyed, the monarchy came to an end, the prophecy came to an end, the Kohen Gadol came to an end. All of these institutions that surrounded the Torah and surrounded and enveloped the people of Israel in service to Hashem, kaput, no longer available. And people thought that there was no longer a covenant. Came along the Anshe Knesset Hagadola and instituted prayer, and instituted a Beit HaKnesset, talked about having a minyan. It's not mentioned in the Tanakh, a minyan. Although every so often it says Eidah, which we say is a minyan. But okay, it's not mentioned in the Tanakh, right? Because it wasn't necessary. Everybody was focused on Yerushalayim, focused, like Shlomo HaMelech said, all prayer should be offered through this house. Even if you're in the diaspora, turn your heart towards Jerusalem, turn your heart towards the Beis HaMikdash. That was the focal point, but when the focal point was destroyed, now the Chachamim came along and said, we can't let this religion falter.
Okay.
We can't let it falter. So when there's no more Yerushalayim, when there's no longer a Beis HaMikdash, we instituted Batei Knesiyot, and we instituted prayer, and we even gave a format to the prayer. We institutionalized prayer. But while the Beis HaMikdash stood,
it was a mistake, but it wasn't Avodah Zarah.
I told you that. It wasn't Avodah Zarah. It was a misplaced spiritual venture. That's what Obama was.
Was it that bad?
Well, I have no idea. Maybe when we get upstairs, we'll ask. That'll be one of the questions. We'll ask Hashem, how bad was it? After all, he did have some spiritual motivation. I think the answer to that question is the same thing that plagues many, many people today. Can I make my own spiritual route to God? Or do I have to follow the prescribed structure? Not the passion, but the structure that has been laid out over centuries and generations all the way back. Do I have to follow that pattern of service to Hashem, or can I make up my own? That's a debate that goes on in our day too. The answer is simply, I think, is what the Netziv says about Bama. The Netziv, when he talks about what was the sin of Nadav and Avihu, V'hakrivam eish zara lifnei Hashem. They introduced a foreign fire in the Beis HaMikdash. What did they actually do? Well, the Mefarshim and the Chazal are so, troubled by Nadav and Avihu dropping dead, by God striking them dead, in the middle of the festivity of the celebration of the dedication of the tabernacle. Can you just imagine? People were working for months. They were donating and trumot to the Beis HaMikdash, gold, silver, skins, talashani, threads, colorful colors, so that they could weave and make all of the things, the adornments to the Mishkan. And right smack in the middle of the party, boom! 2 prominent priests drop dead. Dashes the whole party, ruins the party, rains on his own party, God. So the Mefarshim are troubled by what in the world did they do to merit such an instantaneous death that marred the entire celebration. So they seek answers. The Netziv, I think, has the best. The Netziv says that what is the Mishkan? The Mishkan is the focal point where heaven meets earth. This is the place which Hashem said, and many say as a result of the Chet HaEgel, which we need to have something concrete. Let's not get into that issue. There is a concretization of service to Hashem through the Mishkan, which is the choice of Hashem. Hashem chose it. Hashem sets the rules. Hashem says, do not bring strange fire to my altar. And Nadav and Avihu, in a moment of passion and a moment of spontaneity, decide, whoa, this is such an awesome event, we want to introduce a fire. And they introduce a fire and they're struck dead. Why? Says in Netziv, because when you are consecrating a place, when you're dedicating the Beis HaMikdash, or you're dedicating the tabernacle in this case, that's the moment that defines its role. That's the moment that defines its role for all of history, or at least all the time that it will remain standing. This is the time that God decided to reveal himself in this fashion, to structure service to him along these guidelines. And if you violate that right at the time that it's being dedicated, you've blemished it. And not only do you blemish it, you set a terrible precedent. You set a precedent that my spontaneity can replace the rules that the master of the universe set up to how to reach out to him or reach up to him, and you decided your own route, your own way. That is a travesty that marred the Mishkan and really went to the root of what is service of Hashem. Service of Hashem is we serve the master of the universe in accordance with his rules and not in accordance with the whims and the rules that we make up.
Didn't Moshe add one day?
That's not a sacrifice. That was a matter of enabling the people to prepare more properly. That was you can do things like that, but he's not saying, okay, instead of standing in front of the mountain, let's all sit. Instead of Hashem said, don't touch the mountain, let's touch the mountain. That's a travesty. When you want to help the people prepare better, that's not a travesty. We're not talking about taking a step to help them prepare for some spiritual encounter, especially one of the magnitude of God's presence, with that, whatever that means, on the mountain. So that's already, that's a different story. And besides that, Moshe Rabbeinu didn't say that we must do this all the time. It says, like, get ready for Shabbos on Friday. He didn't say, well, let's start on Tuesday. Okay? And he's not changing something. He's adding another measure of preparation. But anyway, here, that's what the Netziv says. This Bama was a spontaneous effort to create a new type of spiritual experience, and therefore it was condemned, and they had to die right in that midst, so that it would never set such a precedent that you, me, you, us, anyone can decide how we are going to serve Hashem, when it is contrary to what he wants and what he states and how he structures the approach to Hashem. Anyway, okay, where did we get to that? Oh, that was Bama. Okay. Anyway, so again, we said also was unable to rid the people's hearts from this very, very powerful notion that they could make a Bama, because after all, they're trying to serve Hashem. Vayaveh es koche aviv koche beis Hashem kesef v'zohav v'kelim. And he brought that which was set aside by his father, or that which was set aside for the temple. His father set it aside for his own enrichment, but there were things that were set aside for the Beis HaMikdash, donations and etc. Kesef v'zohav v'kelim, gold, silver and gold and utensils. He brought them into the treasure houses of the Beis HaMikdash. Umilchama ha'isa bein also ben Basha melech Yisrael kol yamehem. And we will read again in Chronicles of more detail of this battle, but there was a war between Asa, the king of Yehuda, ubein Basha melech Yisrael, and between Basha, the king of Israel, all the days of their lives. Now, who is Baasha? We haven't learned about Baasha. We learned about Yerovam ben Nevat. We learned about Avia, who is his son, who didn't rule very long. And we learned that Yerovam ben Nevat passed on, but how? We're going to flesh it in now. Vayal Baasha Melech Yisrael al Yehuda. Baasha becomes the king of Yehuda. I'm sorry, of Israel. Following basically Yerovam ben Nevat. We'll see soon if we learn it that he killed out the house of Yerovam ben Nevat, and he launched a coup d'etat. Vayal Baasha Melech Yisrael al Yehuda, and Baasha, the king of Israel, mounts a war against Yehuda, against Asa. Vayiven es haroma, and he builds up this earthworks. Levilti teis yotzei ubal Asa Melech Yehuda. He hems in Asa, king of Yehuda, basically surrounding him with this deep moat or this berm that was very high, so that you couldn't get up over it so easily. And he surrounded him with soldiers. Uvad al Asa Melech Yehuda. Now comes what also does. Vayikach Asa kol hakesed v'hazav hanosarim ba'otzros beis Hashem v'esotzros beis Melech. And also takes whatever gold and silver he has left over, for after all, Shishak plundered a lot of it earlier in the prior rule. So he has not as much as he would have wanted to, but he takes all of the silver and gold that he has that are remaining in the treasure houses of the Beis HaMikdash and the treasure houses of the king. He sends a secret mission through his servants. He sends this, he dispatches it. El ben Hadad ben Tavrimon ben Chezion Melech Aram. He sends it to Ben Hadad, the king of Aram, Hayoshe b'Damesek, who dwells in Damascus. He hires mercenaries to launch a second front. Because where is Aram? It's up in the northeast. Israel is here. Yehuda is here. So he hires mercenaries to invade the kingdom of Israel and to force Baasha to retreat from his encircling of Yehuda in order to defend his northern boundary. And that's what happens. The
Goyim.
Goyim. We'll see. He tells Aram, we have a treaty. A long-standing treaty way back. I sent you a bribe of silver and gold. Now Baasha wasn't stupid exactly. Baasha first made a treaty with Aram that they would not invade his country, so that he could be free to attack this in the south against the kingdom of Yehuda. So what did Asa's emissaries tell Ben Hadad? Hefer es brischa es Baasha Melech Yisrael. Vitiate your treaty with Baasha, the king of Israel. And if you come against him, he will withdraw from me. He will no longer attack in the south.
He was a decent person, Hadad. Otherwise, they wouldn't say that.
Well, no. What they're saying here is he was bribed. He was paid.
What does he say of the names of the previous generation of Hadad?
He's a Hessian. You know who the Hessians were?
No.
They were hired by the British to fight against the Americans in the Revolutionary War. Okay? No, I'm just saying he hired mercenaries. And what was this bris that they had with prior kings of Judea? It goes back to when David conquered Ben Hadad and imposed a covenant on him, or was so dominant that they were afraid of David HaMelech, so they entered into a treaty. And he's saying now, remember that old treaty? Listen, let's live up to that old treaty, defer and vitiate your treaty with Baasha, send your men southward into the kingdom of Israel, and relieve the siege that I am suffering under. Vayishma ben Hadad el Melech Asa. And the king Hadad listens to the King Asa. Vayishlach esarei hachayolim asher lo al orei Yisrael. He sends his soldiers against the northern communities of Israel. Vayachas Iyun ve'es Don ve'es Ovel ve'es Macha ve'es Kol Kinrot al Kol Eretz Naphtali. And all of the streams by the lands of Naphtali, he invades to the north. Vayikishmo Basha, when Basha hears that he's facing an attack from the north, Vayechtal mi benos Rama, he stops building this surrounding siege, this Rama, this berm. Vayeshev besirtza, and he dwells in Tirza. Okay. Oh, we read a little bit here. V'hamelach Asa hishmias kol Yehuda, and then the king Asa makes a clarion announcement throughout the lands of Yehuda. Ein naki, no exemptions. There's no exemption from this, what's called conscription. Vayisu es avnei haroma, and they carry off all these big boulders and stones and everything that Basha put in this berm. V'eseitzeha, and the wood that was supporting this rampart. Asher bono Basha. Vayiven bom hamelach Asa es geba binyamin ves hamitzvah. And also turned all that material, made it to fortify Geva and Mitzvah. But Yeser Divrei Asa, and the rest of the accomplishments of Asa, B'chol Asa, and all of his valor, B'chol Asher Asa, and everything that he did, V'ha'orim Asher Bona, and the cities that he built up, Halohe Mitzum, Sefer Divrei Yom Melach Yehuda, they are recorded in the Chronicles of the Kings of Yehuda. Rak le'ezik naso, chola es raglo. However, at the end of his life, he suffered his feet. He couldn't, I don't know exactly what it was, but he couldn't walk. Okay, we'll see maybe a little bit more about this. He's laid to rest with his fathers, and he's laid to rest in the city of David with the in the crypts of the kings. And Yehoshaphat, his son, rules in his place. So, we will now turn to Divrei Hayomim. We have maybe 2 more minutes or 3 more minutes. I'm not sure it's worth starting. But, just so we don't break early. Anybody have any questions at this point?
No, I have a different question. It has nothing to do with what we have just learned.
Oh, okay.
How come that we say, Yishmach zevulun b'tzetecha, v'Yisachar be'oalecha? So how come the Issachar finished with the Israel?
Say that again? I don't understand the question.
Yishmach zevulun b'tzetecha.
Yeah, and Yisvulun should be rejoice in his going out.
V'Yisachar be'oalecha.
And Yisachar in his tents.
So Issachar finished with Israel, not with Yehuda.
Oh, Yisachar followed Yisrael and not Yehuda. Why did he do that with the scholars?
If he was be'oalecha.
Okay, well, he says Yisachar bo'alecha. Remember what it said here. All the Kohanim, all the Leviim, ba'achareihem, and those who follow the spiritual ways of Israel, moved south. So, again, this is used, of course, to explain why we cannot claim that we're all from Yehuda, because there was a great irvuvia, an intermingling of the tribes, and Yisachar was probably from those who were mentioned as having moved south at the time of Yerovam ben Avad corrupting spiritual practice. So that might be that might be the answer. But we will see here. I'm going to read from Divrei Hayomim as to what happened in the days of Asa. We'll stop, because I don't want to start something that we can't finish.
Question.
Sure.
Where all the kings of Judah are buried? Where are they buried today?
They're buried at Yer David. You know, we're outside of the city wall.
Where the tomb of David is?
We're Har Zion, let's call it. Where we think that David HaMelech is buried, where the tradition
They're
says...
all buried there? All the kings of Judah?
Yeah, they must be buried there. Well, you know, Avshalom has that monument down in the valley. Maybe at Har HaZeitim they were buried. Somewhere around here, I don't know exactly where it is, because, you know, it's like 3,000 years ago. We don't really have a record of it exactly. There wasn't a Chevra Kadisha that recorded it on a computer and you couldn't print it out. Now, we know we can identify specifically each grave, but in those days there was no way to do it. I don't know. It's a good mystery. Where is it? I guess at some point maybe grave robbers went into it and despoiled them. I don't know. I personally don't know the answer to that question, other than our tradition says that David is buried. It's not even a real tradition. It's a short-lived, not that long a tradition that David is buried on Har Zion. If David is there, then we're saying that others would be there too. The battle that's going on there by Ir David, by Har Zion. By Har Zion. The church claims that was the room where the Last Supper was.
Yeah, it's not exactly there. It's 50 yards.
Okay, so Rabbi Goldstein, who has the diaspora yeshiva, after the 6-Day War, went up and claimed that whole area for his yeshiva. Mm-hmm. All of a sudden, the Catholic Church started to say, well, you can't claim that area because it is where the Last Supper happened, and we need that to convert it into a church or some kind of spiritual monument to Yoshka. So what did Rabbi Goldstein do to defer the power of the church? He made it a monument to the dead of the Holocaust. He figured, how can I blunt the Catholic Church's assertion of this area? I'm going to make it a museum. I don't even know if we want to call it a museum, a memorial to the dead of the Holocaust. Now let's see if the church can try and chepa with the dead of the Holocaust. But they did anyway, but he's staving them off, at least at this point. So I thought that was a brilliant move on his part, but that's what's happening up there. The trouble is that they prevailed on the government to allow them to have a religious service by Har Zion, and as a result, there is also an effort to have davening and spiritual to Torah study, all there also to counter the church.